I would now like to introduce David Gilmore. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dave. He's a real visionary in the field of design and beyond. He is the president and CEO of Design Intelligence and Design Futures Council, and his expertise provides strategic advisory and transaction support for companies and firms, which takes him to over, and has taken to over 70 countries in the world. He sits on multiple private company boards, and he's a regular contributor to thought leadership in the built environment. And he engages steadily in the Silicon Valley, technology strategies, development, and go-to market initiatives. So Dave, we're all very eager to hear your presentation, your thoughts on building a changing world, leading through influence. And I want to thank you, Dave, sincerely for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay, Nancy?
Yes.
Wonderful. I think I need to share my screen. I will do that now. Go right here. Okay. Aren't we having fun? All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Great, great. Well, it's so nice to see Nancy's face and to hear voices and engage with everyone. And this is a wonderful vehicle that you're using to bring a community together in a virtual environment. And I'm excited that you're experimenting with this and exploring with this. It certainly is a lower budget opportunity with, I think, high impact. And so very exciting. Congratulations to you. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia today. It is raining and wet and cold, and I'm screaming for spring, so I can't wait till it gets here. So I'll just dive right in, if that's okay. You'll notice here, if you are over 50 years old, you might remember this, or if you're into the way things come around, Bob Dylan music, you'll see the tagline here, for the times, they are a changin'. Let's take a look at that very first verse, or the last two verses actually, of his song. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand. For the times, they are a changin'. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast. The slow one now will later be fast. As the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last. For the times they are a changin'. And if you don't know this music, I encourage you to go and get it. It was a call to radical change back in the late 60s when we saw a dramatic change occurring in the United States. It spread around the world. It was a call to a different context than where we are today, but still it was a significant change. And that's what we're stepping into as we move into the built environment of the future. We believe at Design Intelligence that honestly every dimension of human experience is changing at a rate of pervasiveness and acceleration unlike any prior period. Change has always been with us. Change is constant, as the philosopher said, but not at this level of pervasiveness. It is moving into every area of life. And it is happening at such a speed, probably because our ability to communicate and interface and publish and broadcast change, it is unbelievable what's happening. And as that occurs, the world is in a radical change on a geopolitical standpoint, an economic standpoint, on a demographic standpoint, the way we think about the world. The industry that we live in, which we like to call the built environment industry. Our industry is radically being disrupted. There are major calls for change and new levels of responsibility. that we have not seen in a long time. The institution that we use to educate the future is being challenged with change and relevance on a regular basis. It's accelerating to a point that is almost untenable to many. The second or the fourth here is the professions are really being challenged with where they're going and what they've been doing. We spend a lot of time with the professions, and we find that there is a significant almost disorientation occurring as change is happening so quickly. And down at the individual level, how people see themselves as in the architecture and design and engineering communities, there is radical change being asked for in how we think, in how we speak, and in how we behave going forward. We see there are foundational shifts that I want to speak to because they have a direct relevance to pretty much everyone that we're spending time with today. And it has to do with this very fundamental foundation of our values, our ethic, and our value and our morals. And I think that these things are so often misunderstood. So for the sake of clarity, let's take a moment to really define values at the most vernacular level. Values are those things which we hold precious, guard, and run to when trouble or tragedy strikes. It's what we live for, and frankly, what we die for. And it's interesting when you and I define our value set, we're probably not saying, I'm going to die for great design. We're probably not going to say that I'm going to die if I don't get an A, etc. Ideally, there is something more visceral, deeper within our core that we say that we hold precious, that we guard, and that we run to for safety and care when trouble or tragedy strikes. Secondly, in this continuum is this idea of the ethics. And ethics are value-aligned standards that one sets to bound their thinking, their speaking, and their behavior. So critical to human behavior and the way that we operate in the world is ensuring that we have an ethos, a standard from which we want to operate out of. And then we move to morals, and morals are really those observed behaviors. It is when we look at the morality of a person, we're looking at their behavior against what they say they are or aren't, their standard and their ethos. And when we put these things together, our values, our ethics, and our morality really is what defines our culture. And so what's happening in the world today is we have a significant divergence occurring in values, ethics, and morals around how we operate within the world. We're seeing the exiting generations, primarily the baby boomers, as they move out, and entering generations from the Gen Zs to the millennials to the Gen Xers. We are having areas of conflict occur in what we call life and living, and how we interpret life and living between our different value sets and our different standards and our different observed behaviors and what occurs. And as that happens, we're kind of challenged against a series of what we call intersectional flashpoints. Critical to the future of our industry, the built environment industry, is allowing this kind of discussion to take the front seat. More often than not, we are more comfortable discussing design types, the use of data, machine learning, accelerated and/or artificial intelligence type of learning. These are things that are interesting and wonderful and disruptive and cool, but we rarely speak to the things that are at the heart of each of us, which is our value set. And yet it is our value set that's creating this divergence that is also creating these flashpoints. We're seeing a flashpoint as the generations conflict around values, around what they fundamentally believe to be right and good and true, around their orientation to life and living, around what is most important, that is, their priorities, and around what their ambitions are. Generationally and demographically, we are seeing a tremendous divergence in this between the exiting generations and the entering generations. It's unlike other times. The greatest generation, as they're called, the generation that came out of World War II, really made the baby boomers somewhat in their own image. They made the decision that their values would be as aligned as possible, and beliefs and orientation, priorities and ambitions would drive a new economy. And certainly as a result of that, the baby boomers created what we live in today, which is 20th and 21st century capitalism, which has been radically successful on many, many dimensions and radically irresponsible on other dimensions. And yet there was still this linkage that brought those two generations together. As we've moved forward, the what we call the Generation X folk has been a divergence, is where the first clear divergence began, but not holistically, between these ideas of values and beliefs, orientation, priorities, and ambitions. We see that really more happening with the millennial generation and the Gen Zs that are coming up behind, is where these conflict or flashpoints are occurring. And it's not for animosity's sake. It's simply when we have a different set of priorities and values that occur. How does this impact, or what does this mean to the future of the design profession, is kind of what we want to spend a little time on here today. We believe that these divergent values yield divergent definitions. The first is value realization. What is value realization? We're seeing a new call for whole solutions over fragmented artifacts. And the reality is that this industry over the last 40, 50 years has really put out a series of artifacts that we find tremendous conflict in the design continuum, from conceptualization all the way through to a completely built or fulfilled product at the back end, because everyone is working in a silo, and that's creating these fragmented artifacts. The artifacts in and of themselves may be good and right and true and wonderful, but when brought together, they can create adverse effects of irresponsible dynamics to the environment, if not to the human experience, to society and other pieces and parts. And so what the call is for today, because new values and new priorities are calling us to bring more holistic solutions to bear, not just environmentally responsible solutions, but holistic solutions that look at the complete, what I call splash line of the project. No longer are we being allowed to just build and walk away. We're now being called upon to build and prove the performance of those buildings in the context of this holistic solution set. This is not subtle by any means. Secondly, is how people work together in this value realization is in an interdependent modus over this idea of independence. I'll do my own thing, good luck, I'm going to make it happen, I'll get paid, I'll walk away. It's not going to be popular very much longer, because we're calling for holistic stakeholder buy-in. Every player that works within a program must participate together. Independent action is not going to be popular or frankly even allowed. We're looking for new levels of commitment and collaboration between these stakeholders. It is critical to returning, if not even arriving in the first place, at a new responsible way in our industry. And then number three is this idea of returning to the master generalists over myopic specialists. We have seen this radical shift over the years of moving from the master architect builder to this splintering out of specialties to the point that it's almost impossible to bring them together into a cohesive way. We certainly have seen this in medicine, where in the years, many years ago, there was the general practitioner who knew a lot about a lot. And then we began to, in our science, to drive us to deeper and more refined levels of knowledge and understanding. And that resulted in this entire population in the medical field of specialists. And it has created such a fragmented healthcare context that American healthcare, as smart as it is suboptimal in its results. I have an idea that might be through our radical lack of collaboration and the fact that we have forgotten why we became doctors in the first place. This same dynamic is applying over here to the built environment industry. Many architects have forgotten what architecture is about. And many of the schools are teaching such refinement and specialization that we forget what the whole calling of architecture is in the first place. We believe that in the future, and we're seeing it even now, we're going to see a much bigger return to the master generalist. That is, to be the jack of many trades and the master of some, not one. As you know, we want to see a broadening of that occur. And so by these three things together, holistic solutions, an interdependent way of acting, and operating out of a master generalist context, you will see value realization accelerated and measurable, both quality and quantity in a new way. We move on from here to some ideas about what's really important. On my screen is a study that was put out by Pew Research on this wonderful question, getting ready to ask folks about these current elections. And here's the question. I'm going to read a list of some of the issues that will probably be discussed in next year's presidential election campaign. As I read each one, please tell me how important the candidates' positions on that issue will be in influencing your vote for president. Extremely important, very important, somewhat important, or not important. It is the column to the right that we are most interested in, the combination of extremely and very important. Now, it's important to note that this particular survey that was put out to around 5,000 people. It was indistinct as far as who the responders were by demographic, by age, by sex, by ethnicity, by location in the country, et cetera. It was a kind of all in there and everyone spoke. Now you're going to see something very interesting here. Here are where really the top priorities were. Number one was the fifth one down, the economy. Number two was education. Isn't that interesting? Number three was healthcare, and number four was terrorism and national security. You will notice down about 6 or 7 lines is climate change. The combined score was only 55%. Seems interesting, doesn't it? Given the fact that that seems to be taking so much of the headline today. Now, because this was not understood, we spent some time to talk to Pew about their research to try to understand really what was the demographic makeup of those that responded, only to find that a significant, not majority, but a significant percentage, let's say over a third, were baby boomers who actually had the time to take the survey in the first place. So you'll find an interesting stacking here. DesignIntelligence also did some work, and we did some work to look at a different demographic. And here's what we found. These were ranked among folks under 50, specifically under 50, and we spoke to them across the country. Our response rate was a little over 4,000 people that responded to this, and this was their number one. Of the 81% said environmental responsibility. social responsibility. Interesting thing, common sense resolutions, we'll talk about that here in a second, economic growth, and political stability. A very different ranking than what you saw on the page before. Let's take a look at what environmental responsibility was understood to mean. Energy use, natural resources, and quality dwellings that didn't put out so much energy pollution or carbon emission into the space. Number two, social responsibility is understood as equality and equity, inclusion, and an interesting term here, citizenry. We'll talk about that in more detail in just a moment. Number three, common sense solutions to healthcare, immigration, and affordable housing. There was an interesting statement that came out from one of the respondents, and it said, my God, we're Americans. We can put people on the moon and we're about to get them onto Mars. Why can't we figure out healthcare, immigration, and affordable housing? I think that's a pretty common sense response to a society that's this advanced and this wealthy, that we're still making excuses for not dealing with some common sense things. Number four, economic growth was understood as being not only sustainable and balanced, but accountable. And accountable means more transparent in the context of this survey. And then last, political stability. There'll be an interesting point here, that we would find national equilibrium. We would stop being imbalanced. That secondly, we would have multi-party elections, not a duopoly of elections. And that number three, interesting that responsible journalism was put under the context by most of the respondents as being associated with political stability. A very interesting read than what we saw here just a moment ago. And so all of this is asking for a new set of priorities. Let's dig down into some of these a little bit further. I apologize, there's so much text on the screen. Nancy, you will get a copy of this. I think it's being recorded anyway, so you'll be able to distribute it. Environmental responsibility, very interesting things here. In the context as a citizen of Earth, Earth being our home, are we behaving responsibly? Do we conserve, keep clean, reuse, renew, restore, and act as responsible stewards? Are we making choices indicating awareness, assessment, and adjustment? Are we aware of healthy, sustainable, resilient qualities in the choices that we're making? Are we assessing the implications, ramifications, and risk of the choices that we're making? And are we adjusting in cases that require rectification and reconciliation? Now, the reality is these are rhetorical for this presentation. They would make an unbelievable, great joint session to argue and discuss around each of these. Social responsibility is the idea of stepping up to citizen responsibilities, to be a participant in community service, to show a positive attitude towards others in the community. Boy, are we seeing anything but that in this current United States? Are we displaying an understanding and appreciation of civic responsibilities? And do we possess the strength of character and courage to do what is right? This is what at the heart and soul is social responsibility. It also includes being accepting of others, including others, and creating opportunity for everyone. And then there is a part of social responsibility is corporate social responsibility. It is a longer topic, but it plays into all of these things above. Lastly is this idea of common sense resolutions. As Americans, how many more excuses will we offer for not doing the right things? Things regarding high quality, equitable access healthcare, accountable education, responsible poverty and housing solutions, and responsible immigration. This thing is swung so far left or so far right that we've lost ourselves. We wrote in a paper just put out just a week or a week and a half ago that we believe that most Americans live 20% left or right of center. but we find a pendulum swing that's swung so far out to one end or the other, and it dominates so much of the news that we can't seem to find our equilibrium anymore, and therefore common sense is thrown out the door. Now we want to talk about how leadership is radically changing within this soon future, and we see the following things. Leadership within design firms, leadership in architecture and design and engineering, and frankly, even in construction services, is that the leaders of the future are people that are marked by influence over control. We see this in many different examples across the world as we travel. Secondly, is this idea of being much more collaborative over being commanding. We do believe that there is a counterfeit to the collaboration, and it is seeming collaboration. In other words, I invite people to the table, I listen to what they have to say, all so I can look collaborative, and then I make my decision the way I wanted to do it in the first place. That would be a counterfeit to authentic collaboration. But we're seeing a new move of collaboration moving over commanding. Maybe it's a pure demographic thing, but I believe it's a pure value shift. Leadership that is more focused on qualities than just quantities. I'm concerned in my position that our obsession with data, machine learning, and the hopeful someday realization of authentic artificial intelligence is leading us to be obsessed with quantification over qualification. And I think there's more work to be done on this, that we need to spend more time, is what is the quality of the community, as we say, of the building to the block, to the neighborhood, to the community. What quality changes were made, or the implications of those changes that can be made when we consider the built environment. Number 4 is that people are looking into leadership for their current relevance versus celebrating past laurels. I think far too many of the firms that are around the world are still talking about the great things they did in the past versus staying currently relevant to what society is calling and screaming for when it comes to responsible choices. And that we're seeing a completely new posture with this leadership that's emerging, of being open postured. They're approachable, they're willing to listen, they want to hear, they want to be collaborative in their decisions over a dominant hierarchy. This is a radical shift, ladies and gentlemen, than what we've been watching over the last 20 or 30 years at least. Influence, collaborative, qualitative, current relevance, open postured approachability. Architects and designers are called to be more. Yes, your screen is not scrambled, it is Greek. And in the Greek language, we have this idea of the polymatis. And we believe that architects are called to be such as these. That is, we are called to having learned much. What does that mean? A polymath is someone who fundamentally knows a whole lot about a whole lot, a whole lot about several topics. We believe this is the new calling, the higher calling for the architect. You see, the architect and design community need to be fluent in the language and the thought of philosophy, material sciences, business, economics, data sciences, computer sciences, and you'll see these other lines going out to indicate there's many more pieces and parts to this context. I again go back to the point that we've become so myopic in our specializations that we've forgotten that we serve as a piece of a whole, and yet the architect design professional can also center as a nexus for all of this knowledge to come together and find its realization in the next project, in the next buildings that are being put forward. So all this being said is what? At the end of the day, we're asking, can you do it? Can you honor the shoulders that you stand on? By the way, we have the liberty of being critical about this passing generation because they gave us that liberty to be critical toward them by providing such prosperity and context for us. So let's not be dismissive just because there was irresponsibility. Let's honor all the good things that they have provided for us. Let's honor the shoulders we stand on. Number 2, down below, is to thine own self be true. In the Shakespearean context, it really has to do with staying with your own integrity. Can we stay true to our own self? Can we rediscover, as architects and design community professionals, can we rediscover the lost art of diplomacy? What we're living in today is the opposite of diplomacy. It's screaming. We need to learn diplomacy again to move our agenda forward. Number 4, just because we conflict with each other doesn't mean we're divided from one another. Healthy conflict is a positive catalyst for new creation. Let's allow conflict to occur in the context of solid and positive diplomacy. Let's not see just because I don't agree with you and we conflict, therefore we have to be enemies. And in our environment more than any other, this is critical. Number 5, embrace the power of discernment. I believe that we've been given 2 ears and 2 eyes and 1 mouth. That's a radical imbalance, 4 to 1. Why? Because ears and eyes are all about discernment. Are we taking the time to read between the lines and understand before we speak? We must embrace the power of discernment in our profession. Number 6, let's accept that Chicken Little is a liar. Now, you may not know the story of Chicken Little. Chicken Little was a little cartoon or a tale many years ago where an acorn fell on this little chicken's head. And she suddenly said, oh my gosh, her name was Henny Penny. And she was just sure the sky was falling on her head. In other words, everything is falling apart. Chicken Little is a liar. In spite of what you read on the internet or your streaming news, or if you actually read papers today or wherever you get, you're almost sure that the world is ending at any moment. It's not. Let's accept that we have miles to go before we sleep. And then lastly, let's expand our field of play beyond our myopia to a much broader context as we embrace a new, we allow for the conflict of divergent values, beliefs, and attitudes to create a new context for us to operate within in this built environment. There is so much more to say to you, but it's a brief time together. I wish we could all be together and we could talk about these things in detail and mix it up and have great discussion. But this is as far as we'll go at this point. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of you and for tolerating the stuff that I had to bring.